Hi, I'm Chad, and this video is about critical thinking and argumentation. In a broader way, it's about how university works and kind of the rules of the game around thinking, arguing, creating a case, and things like that. When I used to start first year teaching, sometimes I would start by writing up on the board the phrase question everything. So that's a kind of a good rule of thumb for being at university and thinking at university, that questions are generally good. You don't necessarily want to be that annoying 5-year-old who just keeps saying why endlessly and making things difficult for people. But questions are a good thing. They're one of the best things that you can do at university. Hopefully one of the skills you'll learn will be the skill of asking a good question that challenges appropriately and respectfully, using evidence, using research, and makes other people think a little bit better. So that's one aspect of critical thinking, is asking questions and querying. Okay. When we say critical thinking, though, it's important to recognize that it's not just being critical. It's not just being negative, as in being critical of other people. It's not necessarily just finding the weaknesses or the flaws in arguments as well. Part of critical thinking is really an evaluation process. So you can actually do critical thinking by looking for the strengths in an argument. This is where the adaptive work of transformative learning happens a lot more, because it's quite challenging being a student, right? You think, I'm a student, who am I? I don't really have all this knowledge. There are these experts, in the lecture theatre or in the classroom. There are these experts writing articles and books, and chapters, and things like that. Who am I to question them outright? Because surely they know what they're talking about. As we know from adaptive leadership, though, expertise and authority is limited. So it's quite often possible to be able to take issue with authors and scholars in their field. So that's a skill that you'll learn through the course of your studies. And admittedly, it's something that's a little bit challenging. So really, part of that journey is becoming a scholar yourself. And what you do is you become a scholar, you become informed, and then you're able to enter into a critical debate. Now, that critical debate is sometimes seeing the strengths in arguments, sometimes seeing arguments that are weaker or flawed and thinking about why they're flawed, thinking about alternatives. Another aspect of critical thinking is synthesizing ideas. This is a very important one and quite a challenging one. So what you'll do is you'll take 2 separate ideas or 3 separate ideas, you'll bring them together into a new whole. This is creating knowledge. This is one of the main things that you do in research and in university. So this is all a process of being critical, looking at the positives and the negatives in lots of different ways. Now, crucially, this is a game that's played at university. It's what we call a discourse, or it's what they call a discourse in linguistics. It means that there are certain things within the boundaries that can be done and can't be done, or are approved of or not approved of. So there are boundaries to critical thinking as well. One of the key boundaries is really that you need to be informed. So that's why you're given readings in all of your classes and expected to read those readings and kind of absorb them in a way. You don't necessarily get the first reading that you're given and suddenly start critiquing it and pulling it apart and saying how it's wrong and things like that. So it requires a bit of openness sometimes, being critical. So you need to have a look at the reading and go, what are they saying? What's the argument? Do I agree with it? Are there other alternatives? And then you'll read something else on a similar topic and go, do I prefer this one and why? And that's a kind of critical approach to your reading and your content, your subject area, and things like that. So your critiquing and your critical thinking needs to be research-based. That's why it's so important to use article databases, to do lots of reading, to do lots of thinking, and to be open to lots of different perspectives. And it's absolutely okay to change your mind about something. That's a crucial thing. Really, it's one of the most powerful things you can do, is to say, well, I used to think this, but that was maybe based on some assumptions here or a piece of evidence there, and I don't really think that anymore. Now I think this. I've found some new evidence. It's encouraged me to think about things a little bit differently, and I've changed tracks a little bit so that I think differently. I have a new idea, a new approach to this topic, something like that. So that's a very important way of doing it. Then also, one of the things that you may do, you may find yourself doing, is challenging ideas. And this is fine, quite a good thing to do. And you can challenge lots of different ideas. So when you're reading a text or an article or a book, you may challenge the author's ideas. So you may say, I don't really think that's how it works, or that evidence isn't strong to me, or here's another author here who I think has a slightly different approach to it or a different take to it. So you may be challenging of the texts that you read. Now, again, that needs to be reasoned, rational, logical, and informed by evidence, because that's how things are done at university. And also you want to be kind of careful in how you do that, and doing that in a limited way. You may not get very far if you write an essay just saying that everybody's wrong and you don't agree with anything. So you have to kind of give and take a little bit. That's kind of what's expected in the game of critical thinking. You may also challenge other people's ideas. You may challenge other students in the class. This is a fairly common one. People are fairly used to having healthy disagreements. When you do so, you challenge other people's ideas and not them directly. This is a thing that people are fairly familiar with from the workplace culture. But again, this is about sharing different perspectives, having healthy debate, and opening your mind to a different way of thinking about things and a different way of doing things. Most interestingly, you may challenge us, your lecturers or your tutors. Now, this can be a tricky one. People are often a little bit wary of doing that because there is often a lot of authority that sits with the lecturer as well. So you want to perhaps be, I don't want to say careful, I don't want to scare you away from doing it, but a little bit aware of how it may be received. So some lecturers are very open to criticism or challenging questions or challenging ideas, and they will be open to that. They'll enjoy it, they'll love it, and they'll take it on. Some are a little bit more guarded. So some lecturers are very expert in their field and will not necessarily, may become a little bit uncomfortable. All right, so challenging and critiquing may create an uncomfortable space, which is very interesting for learning, but because it's a space of authority, it can also be a little bit difficult. So try and be aware of your lecturer, the individual personality, maybe even just the mood they're in, because they're human beings as well, and the fact that it is possible to push it too far sometimes. So I think most lecturers have had an experience where people are overly challenging in class, like almost everything that happens they're challenging and critiquing and just making it difficult. That's not likely to serve you very well. It's likely to make things a little bit difficult for you. And so you want to just be a little bit careful about that. And that sometimes there are things where lecturers are happy to be challenged on, and sometimes things that they're a little bit more guarded about. So it's really just working within that system of academia and learning kind of the rules and picking things up as you go. In any case, when you make a challenge or you critique or use your critical thinking, evidence is essential. So this is probably the biggest rule of the game at university, is around the use of evidence and backing up your ideas with evidence that you've found from scholarly sources. So you don't necessarily want to use Wikipedia or a dodgy tabloid. It's important to have scholarly sources as well, but evidence is essential. Reasoned, logical use of evidence is what you need to do critical thinking. Usually that will be rewarded and that will be well done. But how do you use evidence? It took me quite a while to learn this in my PhD. I got to learning this very late in my PhD, so I was a little bit slow. But my supervisor was able to put it really explicitly for me. And that was that an argument is a claim supported by evidence. In university, we make arguments. We make scholarly arguments, which are claims supported by evidence. That's a crucial kind of concept to get your head around, particularly when you're writing an essay or a persuasive piece of writing. It also applies when you're writing reflectively. So you'll need to use evidence and examples and issues and ideas in your reflective writing, but particularly in scholarly, academic, persuasive writing, such as writing an essay or sometimes a report. So the claim is the thing you want to persuade your reader of. Okay? It might be, For example, McDonald's is the worst food ever. Now, if you don't have any evidence to support that, it doesn't really matter whether your listener or your reader agrees with you or not. If you don't have evidence to support it, it's not an argument. It's actually an assertion. So be quite careful of making assertions and trying to convince people without the use of evidence, because that's generally not seen as very strong. Evidence is a piece of fact or a piece of information or something referenceable that you use to support a claim. Now, if I were to say, McDonald's is, terrible for nutrition, bad for the environment, they treat their staff really bad, and are contributing to the obesity epidemic, then that's really just a list of ideas or facts. It's not evidence yet unless it's linked to a claim. If I were to say to you, McDonald's is absolutely terrible food because it's not nutritious, they're bad for the environment, blah, 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 all these reasons, then I'm linking that claim to the evidence. So that's what we mean by an argument. This is the adaptive component of referencing and citation. So referencing and citation has a technical component, which is about what's in italics, where the commas are, what's underlined, what order the information goes in. It's a very technical aspect of referencing. That's about the conventions of referencing. But the adaptive aspect of referencing is that you really need to flag where your information is coming from, because that's evidence used to support your claim. So if you want to be persuasive in your scholarly writing, you need to persuade the reader that your claim is strong. You need to use evidence to back up those claims, link that evidence to the claims quite clearly, and then also give a reference to that evidence so that it's verifiable and the reader can go and find it for themselves. So that's really why referencing is such an important thing. And that's really why plagiarism is seen as such a bad thing. Not just because plagiarism is kind of seen as stealing. That's part of it. But really the big problem is that making a scholarly argument with a claim supported by evidence is one of the key rules of the game. It's just one of the key things we do at university. So if you don't provide evidence, or particularly if you provide evidence from someone else but don't reference where it's from, that's a real breach of those kind of scholarly conventions and understandings of the rules of the game. So in summary, questioning things is good, but you might want to be careful and guarded about how you do it, and do it carefully. Always using reason, evidence, logic, and research to back up your claims and back up your critiques. That critiques can be positive or negative and can be quite complex, and that arguments are really claims supported by evidence. And that's part of the key rules of the game that you'll use at university. I hope that's been helpful, and good luck with your work.